letting me come on and talk about the peat-free, the trials I've been doing this year in the UK. A little bit about myself for a start. My name's Sean Whitworth. I work for Fargro Limited in West Sussex. I've been working there since 2018 as grower media and fertiliser specialist. My background is all with growing since 1989. I started on an ornamental nursery called PA Mormons, where I learnt my trade for 14 years before moving on to be a grower manager on a heather specialist for 7 years. And then starting up a nursery for butters in Lincolnshire in 2011. I was grower manager for 7 years, building up to 20 acres, growing ornamentals before joining Fargro. So going into this year, the idea behind the trials was the transition going into peat-free, trying to meet the government targets to help growers, not just with the peat-free mixes, but looking at the nutrition side as well. So working alongside Cramden Nurseries, we've managed to do that in the first stage of the trials. Trials will continue going into 2022, which will all be accessible on the Fargro website, or I'll let Connor have them as the trials get done when we publish them. So I'll get started on the Cramden Nursery. Cramden Nursery started in 1964. They're specialists in growing pelargoniums, and since diverted to growing a wide range of plants, herbaceous plants mainly, lavender, heuchus, and other hardy stock. The purpose of the trial, we're looking at 3 different peat-free trials, 3 different peat-free mixes, to look at different ingredients in mixes and do different nutrition. The same, what was important in the trial criteria, to look at the same watering and feeding applied to the peat and peat-free samples throughout the trial to see how it would react. So Cramden is a traditional nursery using Irish peat in 2 litre containers. All the propagation is done on site. All the potting is done by manual. They mix their own compost. The stock plants grown under glass are watered by drip irrigation via central located liquid feed injectors. The plants are placed on wire benches and heated by gas-filled warm heaters through the winter to aid to ensure optimum growing conditions. The first trial was done in lockdown earlier in the year in the UK, so it was quite a short trial. We started it in week 12, but we didn't have access to a lot of the data and relied on the grower to send us some pictures. That's why there's only a couple of pictures. With the other 2 trials, I was able to travel, so we did a lot more with the next 2 trials, pictures and into the fertiliser. But the first trial we did, the mix we used on the peat-free was higher coir content. It had 60% coir, 20% green waste, 20% bark. It had a base fertiliser and also had 2 kilograms of an organic fertiliser, DCM, against his own peat mix with a base fertiliser. Both crops were watered the same, and as you can see from the picture, after 8 weeks, the root system was on the peat-free was slightly thicker and more fibrous, and both crops look very similar in nutrition. So what that showed us in the 8 weeks, this was done, like I say, week 12 to week 22, week 20 to week 20, sorry. In the 8 weeks, using the organic fertiliser in the peat-free mix, and then watering both crops the same, the peat-free and the peat, we'll be able to keep the nutrition quality of the plant. What we decided to do, we tried to extend this further for another 4 to 5 weeks to see what would happen, as the wood fibre was showing that it wasn't taking so much nitrogen away from the plant. We wanted to see how the plant reacted in the peat-free. So we continued feeding at an EC of 1 microsiemens and watered both mixes the same. At week 25, the customer's peat-free mix produced a compact, sturdy plant, but the Jiffy peat-free general purpose mix started to stretch. We put this down to the organic fertiliser in there. It lasts for about 120 days. And we put it down to that there was, with the EC of 1 and the 2 kilograms of DCM, which gives you about 0.8 microsiemens. The plant just got out of control a little bit. No growth controls is used on these plants. We use very little growth control at Cramden Nursery. It's all controlled by water. So on that picture, the black pot showed the peat-free mix. Although still good colour, good nutrition, slightly more loose in its framework. Second trial we did with a different mix, it called peat-free general mix. The makeup of the peat-free mix was 30% wood fibre, 10% green waste, 28% cocoa pith, 15% perlite and 3% clay. It had a base fertiliser plus a slow release Crotodor, which is a 3100 slow nitrogen. That will help feed the wood fibres. We didn't put any organic fertiliser in this mix. We wanted to see how the peat-free mix responded against the peat mix. So in the first couple of weeks, you can see the root system on the right, which is the peat-free mix, was a more fibrous and a lot more vigorous than the normal peat mix on the left. So in week 20, the peat-based grow media is ready. Was reading. We did some EC readings in both pots. The peat mix was reading of about 2 microsiemens. So they was feeding at 1 microsiemens. And then with the base fertiliser still in there, was reading at about 2 microsiemens. In the peat-free growing media, the reading was around about 1.5 to 1.6. So both mixes were being fed at, like I said, at microsiemens of 1. What we think is in the peat-free mix, he was getting some leaching, and also with we're losing about 25% of nutrition to the ingredients. In the trial 2, all through the trial, the root system in the peat-free general mix appears to have a more vigorous spread around the bottom of the pot compared to the peat mix, but the rooting system is mainly around the side of the pot. The crop of the zonal Pelagonas is watered every day through drip irrigation, only enough to last 24 hours. The feed what was used was a 102, which is the nursery's own recipe. As you can see in image 8, the right hand side is a peat-free mix and the plant on the left is a peat mix. Both good root systems, but the root systems are different. When you turn the plants over, the image 9, the plant on the left is a more balanced pelargonium, hit target for the 8 weeks, but the plant on the right, the peat-free mix, was showing signs of yellowing and a smaller, and that was down to lack of nitrogen. So because the nitrogen was going to the wood fibre or leaching, even with the slow release Crotodor, it wasn't keeping up with the main crop. What we did, we added 2 kilograms of DCM to half of the peat-free mixes to the general mix. So half of the plants, what was in there, we put 2 kilograms of DCM on top, dressed organic fertilizer, watered it in, and then we left it 4 weeks, and then we come back and we observed after 4 weeks. So the first plant on the left, on the top picture, that's the one with the peat-free with the DCM added. The one in the middle is just the peat-free mix, and the one on the left is the peat mix. The middle shelf just gives you the middle picture just gives you a side view of the rooting, and the bottom picture, as you can see, the peat-free mix on the first left with the 2 kilograms of DCM has nearly doubled in size. The organic fertilizer started feeding the plant, and with the EC of 1, it was being fed through liquid, also made the plant saleable at the right spec. The plant in the middle, peat-free mix, which we didn't give no extra fertilizer to, we just carried on feeding in the EC of 1, showed signs of yellowing still, and still was about half of the size it should have been. The blue pot on the right is the normal mix. So this was telling us when we go into trial 3, we should start off the trial with 2 kilograms of DCM in half of the peat-free mix to see how it worked. With the DCM was losing about 25-30% nutrition, mainly nitrogen, in the peat-free mixes. So trial 3 was done in week 21. The mix was called pot mix. This mix had, similar to the general mix, except for it had a higher wood fibre content, 40%, 15% bark, 10% green waste, 35% cocoa pith. It had a base fertiliser. It also had a wetting agent, and then it had 2 kilograms of organic fertiliser. So after 4 weeks, both crops was watered with a feed of 102, using a ratio of 1:200. The peat-based mix after 4 weeks, you can see just rooting in image 10. The peat-free mix in image 11, same stage, is more vigorous and white rooting again. Both crops look similar in image 12, same size after 4 weeks. So the organic fertiliser was working, it was keeping up with the crop. Week 26, this picture shows that the 3 plants, same variety. The first plant on the left is the Jiffy peat-free pot mix with 2 kilograms of DCM, organic fertiliser added to the mix. Good root system, nice top growth. The plant in the middle is the Jiffy peat-free pot mix, but with no organic fertiliser, just the EC of 1 we've been given it. Again, a good root system, but the foliage was a lot smaller. And then the plant on the right is the normal peat mix, which would be getting the EC of 1. When you look at the top view of the pelargoniums in week 26, what this shows is the first pot on the left with the 2 kilograms of DCM has kept good nutrition, it's kept good size, it's met all the specs. So just by adding 2 kilograms of an organic fertiliser per cubic metre, it's given us about 0.8 of a microsemen. We've fed the same as the peat mix, an EC of 1. We've watered all the plants the same. The difference is the plant in the middle is exactly the same mix, but without the organic fertiliser. So as you can see, slightly more yellow, slightly smaller. And then the pot on the right is the customer's own mix. So what we learned from the trial, by adding, we used 2 different fertilisers in the peat-free mixes. We used an organic fertiliser, and we also used a slow release nitrogen fertiliser. What we found was that the slow nitrogen fertiliser worked to a certain extent, but it wasn't enough. The customer didn't want to change how he fed and how he watered. He still wanted to feed at an EC of 1, so it was a challenge. By adding the organic fertiliser, 2 kilograms, we found that we could actually do that. We could feed at an EC of 1. We could water every day, because it was on a drip irrigation, little and often. The plants didn't dry out, they kept the same similar moisture content down to the Fibersorb wetting agent we use in the peat-free mix. As you can see from the rooting on the peat-free, if I go back one, the rooting is all the way up the pot, which I'd rather see in a mix, because then you got better distribution of the nutrition. If you've got too much root at the bottom and not enough up the pot. So yeah, that's the end of the trial. Hopefully that made sense. And any questions?
Thanks for that, Sean. That was very interesting. Great insight into what is currently happening in peat-free and the possibilities. There's a few questions coming. I guess the first one, is just maybe go into a little bit more detail in regards to the components of a peat-free mix, and give your opinion on each of the new substrates that you would be using, and what are the benefits and maybe the challenges that each of these substrates presents to a grower.
So the first substrate we use had a higher coir content. So the idea was that coir is similar to peat. It's got a good buffer. Water, in theory, the watering should be similar, but we're very conscious of cost. Coir is not. It is a waste product from coconut, but environmental friendly. It still has to travel halfway around the world. It still has to be buffered. So we're very conscious that the cost of coir has gone up quite a lot in the last 2 years. So by using this mix, it could become very expensive. So, but we wanted to trial a high coir mix to see how it reacted, which it did very well in the first trial. You know, the grower didn't have to do much different. The second trial and the third trial, we looked at one with a medium 35% coir, with a higher wood fibre 40%, with the aim of looking at bedding, bed packs and that type of thing to run through transplanters. The third, the general mix it had a lower coir content, only 28%. Could we get away with a low amount of coir, but still have the water retention and the feed? Because you know it's a bit of a worry when you start dipping below 35–40% coir. You know, you could actually end up having a dry pot all the time and no nutrition. But actually, we didn't find that with the Fibersorb and the organic fertilizer. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and just touch on that, the organic fertilizer, maybe give your own thoughts and opinion on it and how successful it was.
Well, for the last 3 years, we've started. Fargro was approached by DCM, which is a Belgium company, Dutch Belgium company, with an organic fertilizer. It's all about a mini grain technology. So the mini grain is between 2,000 microns, 800 2,000 microns. What it does is it's got about 13 different ingredients, and it gives you the reliability over 120 days. The one we used in this had an NPK of 634. We used another one in peat-free mixes, which is an 856. And the idea about using the organic fertilizer, especially in the peat-free mixes, you don't get the leaching. You get a slower release. It breaks down with the soil life, and it's unavailable to the plant. So whereas mineral fertilizers, you can, especially nitrates, you can get run through very quickly with peat-free mixes. We've seen that already this year, whereas the organic fertilizers tend to hold on to the nutrition.
Yeah. And how ready available are the Jiffy mixes to a grower?
Yeah, we've Jiffy are well established in what they do. You may know Jiffy, they've been around for quite a lot of years. This year, when there's been peat shortages, most of our peat comes from Baltics in Estonia. Jiffy own all their own peat bogs. And the peat-free materials Jiffy own about 3 or 4 plantations of coir plantations, which they use into the strawberry growers and their peat-free mixes. And then they buy in the bark, the wood fibre and the other materials, but they're well in front for next year to make sure they've got enough material for next year for all the growers. So there's no problem with materials at the moment.
Yeah, good stuff. And bit of a long question this one is, so I might have to repeat it to you, but by any chance, is there any details on the fungi and bacteria counts in the different potting mixes? Would there be higher counts in some of the mixes and different ratios of fungi and bacterial than others?
Well, what we've seen, we've done soil analysis on the fertilizer because obviously we wanted to see what was happening with the pH and the EC. And one of the things I didn't mention in the trials that the pH is slightly higher than normal peat. You're starting off a more natural 5.8 and 6. With the organic fertilizer, they do go through a process of a breakdown from ammonia to nitrate. and sometimes you do see like a mycelium growing on top of the peat-free mix, but this is quite harmless.
Yeah.
We've seen, as you can see from the root system, we've seen a better root system, very little activity with botrytices, fungal diseases. The mixes don't tend to sit too wet. So the same as peat, if you get them too wet, they can sit wet, but they've got quite good airfield porosity in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I guess a follow on to that question, did you notice any, because I know some growers have noticed that with using peat-free that there is a higher disease and pest pressure with them, especially if you're using the likes of the green waste. Is that the case, or have you seen
Um,
that yourself?
the green waste we use is RHP accredited, which is the Dutch method to like probably leaf or what used to be called BOP or something like that. It has to come to a certain standard.
Mm-hmm.
We've not seen any issues with peat-free, with any soil-borne diseases, any pest pressure. The Cramden nurseries, they went through their trials. They did very little spraying on the peat-free mixes. They do very little chemical spraying anyway, because that's why they use the drip irrigation and manage their water and how they feed. And they found the peat-free no different in that aspect.
Yeah. And question here, but what about using bark and perlite with slow release fertilizer and dolomite lime? Have you come across that in your time?
With the peat-free mixes, we tend to find that we're starting off with a pH of about 5.3 to 5.7. If we want a lower pH, we're just doing some trials of ericaceous crops where we've not added any lime. We've got a bit more wood fibre and bark because they're more stable. And that's one of the reasons we want a lower coir content, because coir's got quite a natural high pH, whereas wood fibre and barks are more stable. We're trying to not use perlite too much because it's in short supply and it's very expensive. So we're tending to look at, like I say, EcoCom, which is the green waste, wood fibre, bark, and coir. Wood fibre being one of the main ingredients.
Yeah. And then maybe we could discuss, you mentioned to me previously that you were running other trials. There's a question in here in regards to looking at other species apart from pelargoniums.
Yes. So
Um,
what we're doing now, I'm working with another grower who's doing a lot of bedding, 6-pack packet bedding. And what we found this time of year is that the wood fibres and the bark are not breaking down because of the weather and how cold it is. That the slow release fertilizer, the organic fertilizer we've put in there, is keeping the nutrition right for the crops, and we're not having to actually liquid feed. Whereas what we actually found doing these trials in the summer, actually the organic fertilizer was going to more the materials, whereas the liquid feed was feeding the crop. So we are doing trials on other crops. So for pelargoniums, we've got another nursery in the UK called Viking Nurseries. They don't mind, they're publishing their trials. And there tomorrow, as I said to you earlier, Connor, we've got conifers growing in them, we've got rhododendrons, pieris, shrubs, all growing in peat-free mixes there, which we're going to first day tomorrow to assess them. And we're going to publish them trials like this. So we're going to have more nursery stock and then some more bedding crops going into the spring.
and just
One of the reasons I was interested in doing on pelargoniums because they can be quite hungry and quite vigorous. So if we could get the feeding right on these, then it gives you a bit of an insight how some of the other crops which are not so hungry, impatiens and things like that, where you don't need a lot of nutrition.
yeah, and just to follow up to that as well is the potential of looking at tree production and looking at 1 year plus. Is there any thoughts on that, or are Fargro going to be
Yeah,
going into
yeah.
that area?
Looking at, we've actually we've got a tree nursery, Christmas tree nursery. Here we've just supplied 70 cubic meters of a peat-free loam mix, which they've planted into outside into the field into like, they put the peat-free around the roots into sort of like biodegradable pots and putting them in the ground. So that's going to be an interesting one over winter. They root out and they go. Conifers, what we grow with Viking, a 3-year crop. So they're going to be in peat-free into 10-litre pots for over the next 3 years. So we're going to keep an eye on the structure and how it goes over the 3 years. We do use slow release fertiliser in the peat-free. I'm very conscious that slow release can leach. So we're looking at different, like a longevity with the Osmocote, and more the short term with the organic, to get the root system there, to get the crop health. So we take more nutrition up from the CRF.
Yeah, yeah. Would you showed me a presentation there on Friday with the choices. Would you like to show that to
Yeah,
the
I mean, I can
growers?
bring that up if you just give me 1 second.
Yeah, might be of interest to them to see it as well. There's some good root
Probably have to help me.
development
Yeah, kind of
photos.
to get out of this one.
And we also discussed on Friday as well that if there was growers interested in that we could potentially look at setting up a small trial on their site as well. So if there was a tree grower that was interested, or a different type of grower that was interested in trialing the peat-free, that could be an option as well.
Yeah, what would be good if some of your growers are interested in doing some trials with peat-free, and we could look at the mix. And the idea behind the mixes is can you see that, Connor?
It hasn't come through yet, no.
See if I can get this up. I don't know.
Might have to close it down and reshare it again.
1 second, let me. So sorry about this. I'm not very hot on computers.
Oh, no worries.
It says I'm sharing. Let me see. Let me share my screen. Oh, sorry, I've put the wrong one. Go on this one. You can see. Do you see that, Connor, now?
It's coming through now, yeah.
If I take you to, if everyone can see my screen, I'm just going onto the Fargro website, and on the bottom of the Fargro website is the new trial we've been doing with Viking. You can see that okay, Connor?
Yep, yep.
So with the trial we did with Viking Nurseries, it's a garden centre supplier that delivers high quality plants to independent businesses and large garden centre groups, established in 1998. They're a 30-acre site, largely outdoor beds with 1.8 acres under glass. They range from 1.4 to 10 litres. We started the trial in the pot mix, which was the same as the geranium mix, the last mix we did. What we wanted to see is how it would cope into a 2-litre hardy stock crop. So we chose choices because they're quite a difficult crop to get right, and they're quite a fussy crop as well. Would they like peat-free? What you see from this picture's from about 4 weeks old. The 2 pots on the left-hand side are peat-free. The 2 pots on the right-hand side, they're both crops are 4 weeks old. As you can see, the rooting's slightly better in the peat-free mix. By the time week 29, the plants were grown in the peat-free are being fertilised with each watering of an EC of 1.8. Even in the hot weather, which is going to be crucial for the nursery, I'll just show you these 2 plants here. This was after the hottest weekend in July. We had temperatures of about 34 degrees. The crops were watered on the Thursday before the weekend, and we come back after the weekend, and as you can see, both mixes were still quite moist. This bed here, this is the peat-free trial after 6 weeks. It had good top growth with the choices and the peat-free, and that was his normal mix, the normal Jiffy choicier mix. Again, good growth, so there's matching with growth in the peat-free, slightly better rooting, and top growth was good. So the observations, the plants in the peat-free mix are roughly 2 weeks ahead in the rooting compared to the current mix. The foliage growth is greater and even across all plants. The mix is free draining and suits the choicier perfectly. The next steps now is just to continue to work with icons. Like I just said in my presentation, we're looking at rhododendrons, we're looking at Pyrus, we're looking at conifer indoor and outdoor. So the conifer indoor is a 1.5 litre crop, and they're like a liner crop to go into the 5 and 10 litre crop in 14 months' time. So we're doing some of them in peat-free to see how they root and grow. We're also doing some of the main conifer crop in that as well. And then we've got a range of shrubs, what we're doing as well. And like I say, I'm there tomorrow to take the first assessment after 2 months. And then we're going to follow that through spring, and then we'll publish it like this. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight to what we're doing on the choices.
And just maybe give us an idea in regards to cost difference going from a peat to peat-free. What would you be talking?
So the cost difference, you're probably talking. I've just been pricing up a nursery for peat-free from their peat mixes. Let me just come off this. So yeah, so cost difference, you're probably talking around £70 a cube delivered in the UK from peat-free mix compared to peat, around about 40-50 pound a cube, probably 50, depending on where the peat's coming from. If the peat's coming from Holland, it's usually around about 50 to 55 pound a cube. So you're talking an extra about 15 pound a cube delivered price.
Yeah.
To go to peat-free. The prices have gone up actually dramatically this year. It was around about 58-60 pound a cube last year, in the earlier on this year, coming up to about September, was only around about £10 more expensive than a peat-free mix compared to a lot of bedding growers, unless some bedding growers got mixes where they're like in the 38-40 pound a cube.
Yeah.
They're going to see a big jump, but some growers are around about £50 a cube, whereas the peat-free mixes are going to be around about £15 cube or £20 a cube more expensive. Prices of coir, perlite have gone through the roof in the last 6 months, 12 months. Well, coir's been going up quite rapidly in the last 2 years, but perlite now in the last 6 months has really shot up quite high.
Yeah.
And as more and more people make the shift over to peat-free, I can see the demand for more material, and the prices are just going to keep going slightly up.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said predominantly working with Jiffy?
We are looking at, with Fargro, we work with Jiffy, Sinclair and ICL. So I work closely with Sinclair as well, with Andrea. ICL, they do their own mixes and that, and they sell through Fargro as well. So, but mainly my job out of the Fargro, in the Fargro area, there's Jiffy, the Sinclair and ICL. Out of the area, so out of the south of England, going more north, I mainly deal with Jiffy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't see too many other questions coming in at the moment, but maybe you could just take like a final take-home message for the growers if they were thinking about moving over to.
Yeah, I think when we started off this year, we knew it was going to be growers was a bit worried about making that transition to peat-free and how we was going to do it. Our main aim from Fargro was to help growers do that. The first thing we wanted to look at, we bought 3 mixes, which you've just seen into Fargro. One of them was a well-established mix. The other 2 have been used before, and we've just brought them into Fargro for the Fargro customers. And what we've been trying to do is every nursery is different. So I like to go in and see how the grower waters his crop, how the nursery structure is. So you can gear that peat-free mix. It may be the same structure, but the feeding may be different to how the grower grows and what crop is growing. So that's been really a good. That's been a good for the customers of Fargro. We've spent a lot of time looking at that, getting that right, so we have no disasters, because that's the one thing we don't want. So nutrition, my message really is in the peat-free is any of them 3 mixes will work, but it's getting the nutrition all right. So a different mix will suit a different grower. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And also, what I'd like to do, Connor, if it is an opportunity, is to come across in the new year over to Ireland, and hopefully some of the growers will let me onto the nurseries and we can talk a bit more face to face. So we could talk about the trials, or if they even wanted to do some trials with a substrate, we could always look at that as well.
Yeah, that would be really good to go out and see where the growers are at and what they expect from it. And yeah, as you said, going out and seeing it on the ground is very important, like, because each grower has their own challenges when they're trying to adopt to a peat-free or peat-reduced
It's
growing
hard to do
system.
it over like this. It's hard to get it across on a webinar. Hopefully, it's
Yeah,
come across right for the growers, and it's been good for them just to get a small insight. But I think when you actually meet and actually see the nursery, it gives you a better insight of how the growers grow.
yeah, yeah. I don't know if Kieran's still there. If Kieran has any final comments or questions.
Yeah, just I suppose how do they ensure maybe uniformity of product? That is a well mixed and uniformity of product. That's not a problem.
No, well, with Jiffy, one plant in Holland, which is where the Jiffy product comes from, or even like the Sinclair, where they do their peat-free, it all goes through the right machinery, the right ingredients have added. It's all done to the highest standard. So when I went around the Jiffy one, everything's done. The dosing, it's all checked. Regular checks are done all the way through the mixes, so you get the uniformity. And also you get like samples took at different stages of the mix and then analysed to make sure it's what it should be.
And how does the product, the different recipes, how do the flow in a on a working line, be it potting or transplanting or whatever? How do the flow?
So what we've tried to do, I'm very conscious that if you get too much coir and wood fibre in the same mix, you can get a bit of binding up. And you also got to make sure the mix is not too wet at potting, or it can be quite heavy in a bell breaker. So we tend to try to make the mixes more balanced instead of being too heavy on one ingredient. And at the moment, we haven't really seen any issues in the 3 mixes we use. They seem to go through transplanters and potting machines quite well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Kieran. There's no other questions that has come in, so we'll probably wrap up with that there. Thanks, Sean, for a very fascinating and insightful presentation into your trial works and what is currently happening in Fargro in regards peat-free. I hope the growers have got something out of it. And if you have any other questions,
if there is any questions, kind of after we've gone, they can always send them to you, and then we can always still answer them. It's not a problem.
yeah. So yeah, if you have any questions, just drop me an email. I'll forward them on to Sean for you. Just also in regards to our next webinar will be on the 15th of December. We'll have Alistair Yeoman of Plant Healthy joining us on talking about biosecurity. I'll be sending you out the link in the coming weeks to register for that as well. So thanks for everybody for joining in the webinar and for all your questions and comments as well. And we'll catch up again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Connor.